8 months off the floor, fighting a flu in the middle of competition, benched at the start of 4 out of 5 games. And Caitlin Clark still walked out of Puerto Rico as the youngest MVP in FIBA qualifying tournament history, not just on Team USA, not just in this specific event, but the youngest ever across the entire history of the format. Let that settle for a moment. Because this is not a story about a player overcoming adversity. This is a story about what happens when a coaching staff tries to install a ceiling on the most transformative player the women's game has ever produced. And the player responds by dismantling that ceiling in front of the entire basketball world. What unfolded in Puerto Rico at the 2026 FIBA Women's World Cup Americas qualifying tournament was essentially 2 completely different stories running simultaneously. On the surface, Team USA went 5-0, punched their ticket to Berlin, and checked every box a qualifying event is supposed to check. Clean record, dominant result. But underneath that clean result was a tension that every serious student of this game needs to be paying attention to. Because it isn't just about Puerto Rico, and it isn't just about one tournament. The most impactful player on the entire roster, by every advanced metric the sport has developed to measure impact, was being held on the bench at the start of games while opponents hung around and figured out how to exploit it. The contradiction between how Clark was being deployed and what she produced every single time she stepped on the floor is the real story here. And the MVP award just made it impossible for anyone to keep looking away. You've been asking about this. Many of you spotted those starting lineups in real time and immediately knew something wasn't adding up. Today we are laying out exactly what happened over those 5 games, why the coaching decisions that were made tell a larger story about how some people in this league still approach Caitlin Clark, what the numbers reveal that the box scores alone can't capture, and what Puerto Rico actually means for the Indiana Fever, for Team USA, and for every nation preparing to face them in Berlin in 2026. If this kind of investigative breakdown is what keeps you coming back, hit that like button right now. It genuinely signals to us that you want more of this coverage. And it takes about 2 seconds. The tournament itself was the 2026 FIBA Women's Basketball World Cup Americas qualifying event held in Puerto Rico. 5 games against 5 national teams, with an automatic World Cup berth to Berlin on the line. Team USA entered as the overwhelming favorite, and the talent on the roster justified that. But tournaments like this, compressed schedules, international competition, defensive schemes designed specifically to slow American teams, they expose things a regular season can hide behind: depth and volume. And the first thing this tournament exposed was a fundamental philosophical disagreement about how to use the best player in the sport. Head coach Kara Lawson came into this tournament with a defined approach to Clark. Use her off the ball. Distribute the minutes across the roster. Build a balanced offensive system that doesn't center around a single initiator. On paper, that is what responsible roster construction sounds like during a new national team cycle that's still developing chemistry. On the floor, it looked like Team USA was deliberately disconnecting their own engine. Clark was watching opening tips from the bench in 4 of the 5 games, while opposing defenses got to calibrate themselves against a starting unit that didn't include the player they had spent the most time preparing to stop. The Spain game is where the contradiction became impossible to rationalize. Spain entered that game organized and disciplined. They were running a soft box and one concept mixed with zone rotations, and it was genuinely working. Their young core, including 20-year-old Yana Martin, who is a legitimate future WNBA prospect, was pushing the pace, attacking the paint, and making Team USA's starting unit visibly uncomfortable. The ball movement was sluggish. The offense was getting bottled up on every other possession. Spain was hanging around, and the scoreboard reflected it. Clark was on the bench, watching all of it happen. Then she checked in. The tempo of the entire game changed the moment Clark set foot on the floor. Where the starting unit had been getting trapped in Spain's blitz coverage and forced into slow, contested, half-court possessions, Clark was converting that same pressure into fast breaks before Spain could reset. She was reading defensive rotations before they finished forming. She was locating kick-out passes that had no business being available. She was pulling up from deep range and forcing Spain's defenders to chase her all the way out to half court. And if you understand what that does to a defensive structure, you understand what it was opening up on the interior behind her. When you have to guard someone that far from the basket, your entire scheme starts to unravel. Clark has known how to exploit that unraveling since she was a teenager in Iowa, and nothing about playing for Team USA changed that. The final score was 84-70. That number actually undersells how competitive this game was before she took over. Spain was good. Every meaningful scoring run Team USA assembled in that game happened with Clark on the floor. Every one of them. The coaching staff kept removing her from the starting lineup, and then kept being unable to remove her from the floor once she was actually in. That cycle repeated itself across the tournament. And it tells you more about the gap between a coaching philosophy and basketball reality than any post-game press conference ever could. Now let's put the numbers on the table, because the numbers are where this story becomes genuinely impossible to argue with. Clark averaged 11.6 points per game across 5 games. She dished out 6.4 assists per game, which totals 32 assists across the whole tournament. For context, at FIBA qualifying level, UST against organized international defenses specifically designed to eliminate passing lanes, averaging over 6 assists a game as a bench player, getting fewer early game possessions than a starter with less time to establish rhythm, is a serious number. Guards at this level, coming off the bench, simply don't do that. She led Team USA in 2-point field goal percentage, free throws made, and free throws attempted. And she played more minutes than anyone else on the entire roster. Not just the Spain game, not just the final, the whole tournament, across 5 games. Read those two facts next to each other. The player they kept benching to start games was also the player who logged the most minutes on the floor across the entire tournament. There is no logical way to reconcile those two facts unless you simply watch what happened every time she was actually out there, because the scoreboard told that story clearly every single time. The free throw volume matters specifically because of what it reveals. Getting to the line at a consistent rate means you are attacking the basket on purpose, drawing deliberate contact, and forcing defenses into choices they don't want to make. That is not a player functioning in a restricted role and waiting for the offense to find her. That is a player actively hunting every advantage available on every possession, regardless of the role she has been assigned. And she was doing all of it in a tournament she entered 8 months removed from a serious injury, fighting a flu, under a coaching structure that was working against her rather than with her. Clark didn't just lead Team USA in plus-minus, she led the entire tournament, every team, every player, every nation that traveled to Puerto Rico to compete for a World Cup berth. When Clark was on the floor, Team USA outscored opponents by a margin that nobody else in the entire field from any country in any game could match. You can spend all day debating coaching philosophies and roster balance and system fit, but plus-minus strips all of that away. It just tells you what the scoreboard was doing while a specific player was out there, and across 5 games, against 5 different national teams running 5 different defensive schemes, the scoreboard had a clear and consistent answer. That answer was Caitlin Clark. The efficiency rating confirmed it from a different angle, not just the top of Team USA, the top of every competing nation across the whole tournament. The most efficient player at the entire event, measured across all teams and all players, was the one being held on the bench at the start of 4 out of 5 games. If you needed a single statistic to capture the disconnect between how Clark was being used and what she was actually producing, that is the one. Drop a comment right now and tell us, were you watching this tournament in real time, or did you catch the highlights after the fact? Because the people who were tracking those starting lineup decisions as they were happening knew immediately that something was off, and we want to know how many of you were in that group. Here is the historical layer that makes this even more significant. This was not Clark's first time doing this at a FIBA event. Back in 2021, she led the USA Under-19 team to an MVP at the FIBA U19 World Cup, winning it at a younger age, on a younger stage, before most of the basketball world had fully locked in on what she was. She has now claimed 2 separate FIBA tournament MVP awards at 2 completely different stages of her career, under completely different circumstances, with completely different teammates. The first time, she was a teenager establishing herself. This time, she was coming back from 8 months off the floor, dealing with illness mid-tournament, operating within a system that wasn't built around her strengths, and she still topped the field. That pattern does not happen by accident. That is a profile. The All-Star 5 selection that came alongside the MVP reinforces that conclusion from a different direction. The All-Star 5 is not a fan vote. It is not a social media popularity contest. It is a technical evaluation conducted by people whose entire professional function is to assess international basketball talent at the highest level. They watched the same 5 games everyone else watched, ran their own independent analysis, and arrived at the same conclusion the advanced metrics did. Clark was the most impactful player on the floor across the entire tournament, regardless of starting lineup, regardless of minute distribution, regardless of the system she was being asked to play within. That is a basketball judgment from the people paid to make those calls, and it aligned perfectly with the numbers. Now let's talk about what actually changed when assistant coach Nate Tibbetts took on a larger role late in the tournament, because the contrast with what had come before is right there on the tape, and it is not subtle. Kara Lawson's approach to Clark throughout this tournament was built around control. Use her as a secondary playmaker. Keep the offense distributed. Don't let the system become dependent on a single initiator. Her fingerprints were visible in the conservative rotations, the cautious starting lineups, the repeated decision to keep Clark on the bench through opening tips while opponents established rhythm against a less threatening unit. Lawson was notably absent from the Spain game entirely, with Tibbetts managing the bench. And Tibbetts ran something fundamentally different from the moment he had control: guard-heavy lineups, elevated tempo, and Clark actually initiating the offense from the top of the key instead of spotting up on the wing waiting to be found. The results appeared immediately. In the Italy game, Clark was running pick-and-roll sequences continuously, making reads before defensive rotations could form, finding the open man on short rolls, and pushing the pace in transition off both made and missed baskets. Italy had no answer for it, because there genuinely is no good answer when a player is processing decisions at that speed from the top of the key. The New Zealand game is where the full picture crystallized. Clark started that game, the first time all tournament she was in the opening lineup. 23 minutes played, the most on the team, with Paige Beckers alongside her and Kelsey Plum spacing the floor. Team USA didn't just win that game. They suffocated New Zealand in a way that looked completely different from the earlier games where Clark was being eased in from the bench. Before we continue, if our coverage has been your go-to source for what's really happening inside women's basketball, becoming a member is the best way to make sure we can keep going this deep. Hit that join button below. Every member makes it possible. Now let's address the Angel Reese dimension honestly, because it was real and it deserves a straight look. Reese is most effective in a half-court set where she can use her physicality to muscle for post position and establish herself as a scoring threat from the block. When Tibbetts shifted the offense toward a faster, guard-heavy tempo, that dynamic changed. Early in the tournament, you could see the friction. Possessions were flowing through Clark and Beckers, and Reese was not getting the same type of ball involvement her game is built around. But here is what actually happened over the course of the tournament. The faster system found a real role for Reese rather than eliminating her. As one of the best rebounders in the game at any level, a faster tempo makes her the engine that starts the break. She grabs the defensive board, outlets immediately to Clark, and sprints the floor as a rim runner. By the Spain game, that transition had essentially completed. The early friction had settled into something functional, and more importantly, something that is genuinely hard to stop. If you're watching this and realizing that what happened in Puerto Rico was a significantly bigger deal than the mainstream coverage treated it as, share this video with a Fever fan or a Team USA follower. We are getting to the part that matters most for for what comes next. Here is what the mainstream highlights kept missing. The Clark-Beckers two-player game that developed over these 5 games in Puerto Rico might be the single most consequential development for women's basketball heading into 2026. These 2 players came into this tournament having barely shared a floor. Different WNBA franchises, different offensive systems, different roles throughout their entire careers to this point. And yet by the Spain game, they were reading each other in real time at a level that normally takes a full professional season to develop. Clark would push pace off a defensive rebound, and Beckers already knew exactly where to position. Beckers would come off a screen, and Clark was loading the pass before Beckers had even cleared the defender. What makes that combination specifically dangerous is the reason it has no clean defensive answer. Both of them can score. Both of them can pass. So when a defense collapses on Clark at the top of the key, Beckers is receiving a kick-out 3 with her feet set. When a defense commits to following Beckers through a screen, Clark is reading that rotation and finding the open cutter before the defense can recover. There is no right choice. Analysts watching the film from these 5 games were calling it flat-out unguardable. And watching the footage, that assessment is difficult to dispute. Here is the forward-looking reality that every person watching women's basketball right now needs to sit with. The floor general skills Clark sharpened running Tibbetts' offense in Puerto Rico, the pick-and-roll processing, the outlet passing, the transition pace, all of it comes back to Indianapolis with her. The system Tibbetts ran across these 5 games is essentially a working blueprint for what a healthy, fully empowered Clark-led Fever team could look like over an entire WNBA season, fast, guard-heavy. Built around Clark reading defenses from the top of the key and distributing accordingly. We got a 5-game preview of something the league has not fully confronted yet. And then there is Berlin. The 2026 World Cup and the 2026 WNBA season are now linked in a way they simply were not before Puerto Rico. Clark demonstrated she can anchor a fast but guard-led offense at the international level immediately after 8 months off the floor from a serious injury. That is not a small data point. Most players coming back from a layoff that long need a significant portion of a season to rebuild their feel for the game at pace. Clark came back and led the entire field in plus-minus and efficiency. The youngest FIBA MVP in this format's history. What that title really means isn't just a historical footnote, it's a forecast. She is doing this right now, at this age, still getting better. Berlin is next, the 2026 season is next, and the coaching conversation that Puerto Rico started about what this offense looks like when Clark is actually running it is a conversation the whole league is going to have to answer. If this breakdown gave you a fuller picture of what actually happened in Puerto Rico, subscribe right now and turn on notifications. We are going deep on Fever preseason preparation, the Berlin qualifying implications, and every development in this 2026 cycle that the mainstream coverage glosses over. Don't miss what's coming. We will see you in the next one.